So I started my channel based on what a lot of people would call weeb culture. I know, unfortunate, but it hasn't really mattered to me what it is as long as there's some sort of anime influence in it. I'll probably like it in some way, shape, or form. That could be anything from like a fighting game to licensed anime IPs, basically Bandai Namco slop. And then there's Dark Souls. You know, a lot of people tend to hold the Souls franchise and it's something only true gamers with refined taste and quality play. There are people from all sorts of walks of life, different backgrounds that play this game.
I'm not going to waste your time with preamble, let's just get on with the video. The game opens in the Undead Asylum. Movement is standard omnidirectional third-person movement seen in many action games. We have—
You might start thinking I'm actually didn't. Hold on, I got let out.
And at the same time, a lot of weebs do not play this game, which is strange to me because I've always kind of seen Souls as just more anime, if that makes sense. And no, I'm not just talking about Berserk. Don't get me wrong, I'm gonna bring up Berserk, but that's for later in the video. Basically see the Souls franchise as a more unique take on your typical anime-inspired JRPG, you know, something similar like a Persona or a Fire Emblem, you know, stuff like that. The only difference is just aesthetics and art style. It's kind of similar to something like Monster Hunter. Like Monster Hunter is basically anime without being anime, you know? And I see that the same way with the Souls game, except instead of being super over-the-top expressive or vibrant, it's more over-the-top with how utterly hopeless and degenerate and morbid it is, which is what we love, of course. Is it a coincidence that FromSoft's main publisher is actually Bandai, the same guys who brought us thousands of hours of anime associated IPs? Well, how about the fact that the multiplayer in these games is just as janky and unbalanced as any arena fighter I've ever played?
I generally believe probably every single release that we had so far, no matter if that's Dark Souls 2, Dark Souls 1, it was basically a bugfest. There was always something incredibly wrong with the game.
How about this spell they added to the game? That's definitely a Kamehameha. There's no arguing with that. That's definitely a Kamehameha, and they didn't have to add that in the game. They went out of their way to put that in the game. There's the ridiculous amount of katanas in the game. For a game that's supposed to be heavily set in Western medieval stuff, you gotta admit, there's a ridiculous amount of katanas for no reason in this game, and they do a lot of weeb attacks movesets. There's the obnoxious amount of JoJo poses, but I mean, every single thing is a JoJo reference on the internet, so I understand if you think I'm reaching by giving you these few examples, but here is where there's undeniable proof that I was like, okay, this game is hella anime influenced. Take Mikola and Melania, Blade of Mikola. Peep their backstory, okay? Two siblings afflicted by curse in their adolescence. One, where the curse affects their whole body, and the other, who had to get prosthetic limbs in both their left leg and their right arm, which they now use with a blade attached to it. Both promise to cure each other of the curse, and so they go on a long and strenuous journey to find the Philosopher's Stone. To find a cure for their sibling. It's basically Full Metal. That's what I'm getting at. That's what I'm trying to say. And you know, as much as I talk about anime stuff on this channel, I'm not the hugest anime nerd. I don't know everything and every influence, but I'm sure there's more in this series. I was always more of a shonen guy, don't really know much about seinen, and I know that this game is heavily inspired by Berserk to the point where it's basically Berserk, which is a seinen. So there might be more seinen references that I just don't know about. Let me know if you've ever saw anything in these games that's eerily familiar to something you've seen in like a manga or an anime. And it's not just Elden Ring, just all across the recent series I've just seen a lot of different anime influences, from like Armored Core, Dark Souls to Elden Ring. I've heard a lot of people compare Sekiro to Vagabond, and even playing Armored Core, I noticed some things similar to other mecha anime, especially towards the end. Apparently I lack media literacy just because I said the game reminds me of Evangelion, according to the comments. But yeah, I don't think Armored Core and Evangelion are one-to-one. I just noticed a little bit of influence. If you look closely, Miyazaki will create a lot of these epic concepts, these epic worlds. And to fill in a lot of cracks with the storytelling and backstory, I noticed a lot of influence from other Japanese media, particularly anime. What I'm saying is Miyazaki's a weeb. He's low-key a weeb. So let's talk about Berserk. Berserk is pretty much the basis for everything that has made up Dark Souls and the Elden Ring series. If Berserk is Dr. Evil, then Elden Ring is Mini-Me. When I even talked about it in another video about anime games, like talking about I wanted more Berserk games, somebody said, bro, just make Guts in Dark Souls. So there's so many references, it's uncanny, and there's endless iterations of Guts armor, and Guts is a character, I swear to God, he just appears in multiple ways in this franchise. Like, I've seen Guts in pretty much so many characters from Dark Souls all the way up to Elden Ring. The arm tree itself is literally taken straight out of the manga.
Dark Souls series has a fair bit of connections between them, but none of that even compares to the amount of connections Dark Souls has to Berserk. One of the more prominent ones involves the Taurus Demon, who shares more than just a few similar traits to Zod. Although an even more apparent connection involves one of Dark Souls' most iconic characters. And Andre the Blacksmith is clearly inspired by Gato. They're both muscular elderly blacksmiths that can craft anything, and it's surprising that a character of this significance is inspired from Berserk. I mean, it's pretty cool.
I'll never forget playing Dark Souls and seeing those bone wheel skeletons and just starting to connect the dots and realizing just how similar and how much connections that these two things had. And it's almost to the point where I'm like, God damn, Miyazaki, is this a bit of plagiarism? Like, bro, chill out on the Dark Souls stuff, bro. You like, chill out.
But at least for that reference, they changed the name. Unlike Rickert, who's, well, based off of Rickert, they don't even try to hide this one. I mean, they're both blacksmiths, and even their designs are similar.
But at the same time, it's just cool to see what has become of this series in video game form. Basically, I see this series as an Eastern take on medieval fantasy that uses Berserk as a basis, but really borrows from a lot of other Japanese influences. And what do you know? A lot of Japanese stuff is influenced by anime. And that's the main part that attracted me to these series, because usually I don't care for medieval stuff. Like, it's the same reason I get bored of Skyrim, but I'll play something like this. Funnily enough, doing research, I found out that Demon Souls, the beginning of Souls games, was created as a way to, you know, compete against Skyrim. So, you know, it's kind of ironic that I don't really mess with Skyrim like that, but it's just something about the Japanese take on this medieval stuff interests me way more than, say, a Skyrim or an Oblivion. But shout out to Oblivion, that was a pretty fun game back in the day. But yeah, I just find this stuff cooler and more interesting, and it just screams anime to me. But it's funny how it appeals to a fan base outside of that, and nobody seems to connect the dots too much. In fact, I've seen a lot of Souls fans get irritated with how they say this series has become more and more anime over the years, which just makes me laugh, because I'm just like, it always has been. That's my whole take on why Dark Souls is anime. I kind of view this as an anime game, the same as I play a lot of other anime games. It's just more unique in its presentation and art style, and the vibes just make it appeal to people outside of that genre, and I just find it interesting. That's all I really had to say. It is what it is. Have I convinced you? Do you agree that Dark Souls is an anime game, or do you think I'm a crazy person? That's all I gotta say. Peace.